Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Life on Purpose Live. We're going for some big things happening in little churches today. We have pastor, professor, teacher, husband, father, Danny Davis. He's an author. He is the revitalization expert on rural churches, and he's written a book called Rural Church Turnaround. So he is out in the communities, watching and leading and teaching people how to lead. So we're going to pick his brain a little bit today about what he's learning in our small communities. So welcome, Danny. We're so glad to have you.
Well, thank you so much, Miss Beth. I appreciate it. And thanks to those who are going to watch and tune in.
And you're in Odessa?
Yeah, Odessa, Missouri. Yeah.
What is that closest to? So we get in our head what that's.
Well, you know you're from a small town when you have to say, well, we're so many miles from.
Yes.
So we're about 30 miles east of Kansas City, Missouri. And so we're a town of about 5,300 folks, good, hardworking people who basically commute to the city to work and then come back, every day. So we're right near, we're about 20 minutes from Arrowhead Stadium, home of the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Kauffman Center where the Royals play baseball. At least, hopefully they'll play next year.
Yeah, exactly. My husband's like, where's my baseball? Well, so, when we talked initially, I was really surprised by the number of people that are not in mega churches because we go to what you would probably consider a big church, but so 59% of the churchgoers in our nation go to churches with less than 100 people, and 94%, I know 500 people can be a pretty big church, but 94% of the people that go to church are in churches less than 500 people.
Yeah. A friend of mine, Mark Clifton, uses the term normative church. So in other words, I've been privileged to have been to all 48 continental states. And as we drove and flew and toured around those places, you see these churches that are out in fields and then you see churches even in large urban areas, storefront churches, things like that. And when you take a big picture of all of the church here in the United States, we're somewhere near 400,000 churches in the United States across all denominations. And if you look at all of that, pretty much the normal type church is that small 75 to 100 member church who are loving Jesus and trying to do what they can to make an impact in their community. Yeah.
Well, and I think that, when you think about many people grew up in small towns and, it used to be that was the norm. And it's, families would grow up and stay all together. And now people are kind of split up. But you're seeing a trend back to, you said there's a rise in people wanting to get back into more smaller communities, more rural communities. And so what is the trend in that direction that you're seeing?
Well, I don't know that we're trending back yet, but we're starting to see signs of that in a couple ways. A lot of times you'll see people who retire who will want to move back to a smaller community a lot of it's for cost of living and so on. But those communities that often see a rise in those people coming back are communities that are somewhat located near some amenities. So in other words, rural communities that are seeing population growth are located strategically where people can get to the city, where people can go to other places, and they have park systems and so on. But recently, a national broadcasting company put out a short documentary talking about how millennials are really considering the idea of coming back to the small town area. Again, it's about student debt. It's about cost of living. We can come back here, but they're not coming back to work in your typical rural type of thing like agriculture or blue collar work, but they're coming back to be what is called a digital nomad. So in other words, they want to be free to work for themselves, be very entrepreneurial, but using digital technology to do that. So for instance, one young lady has moved back to a farming community, or actually a cattle community, and she is now developing technology where cattle auctions can take place via the internet. And so, trying to bring digital age. There are some issues with rural communities having really bad internet, struggling to get good internet. But thankfully, there's legislation currently working its way through the political sphere, where broadband internet is going to be increased in a number of rural communities across the United States. I know our area just received a $3 million grant to upgrade our internet access here, which will do wonderful. So you have
important because so many people are working remotely.
Right. And my wife works for a national bank in the area that has a branch out this way, and during all of the COVID crisis and so on, they moved her to remote work. And we're fortunate because where we live, we're in the city limits and we have better internet here. But I had many church members who couldn't even watch our services online during COVID because they don't have enough bandwidth.
It's buffering and buffering.
Yeah, so they just get the spinning wheel of death,
Yeah. Like purgatory. So I think what's interesting to me about what you do is you're the revitalization coach for rural community churches. So you're going into communities with aging population churches where there's a lot of older people, important people. But what have you learned from, I know a lot of what you do is identify and build up leaders, but what is a revitalized church? What does it take to get to where you're on the move upwards instead of a spiral downwards?
Yeah, well, I don't mean this to be trite or whatever, but you just really need God to move. It's
and people can listen.
Right. And thank God for those people who've stayed.
Yes.
As I work through my doctoral work and then the book that I've written, I would ask people that I interviewed that question. You saw your church going from 250 people down to a dozen or 20 people. There was financial crisis. There were all kinds of things that were happening. Why did you stay? And ultimately, I could sum it up in this word: because God said stay. And because we knew that this would not be the end, that God would provide us leadership and that God would bring us to a place where we could move forward. And so as I interviewed people and work with people, what I find is there's this common language. Let me back up. All churches kind of have a life cycle. Mm-hmm. The typical church stays alive for 50 years. So most churches start and die within 5 decades. But there's a typical life cycle. You start, there's a birth, you kind of move into this adolescent stage where you're seeing growth. There's a lot of energy and everybody's excited. But ultimately, every church will come to a place at the top of this curve where they're faced with a decision to either start a new curve and reinvent and revision and move up, or move into maintenance mode. And when they move into maintenance mode, things begin to slowly make its way down toward death. And so what we find is as we work with, as I work with churches and speak with pastors and lay leaders in those churches, there's this language that you find in those churches that have said, you know what, we want to live.
Yeah.
We don't want to die. We want to see our grandkids have a place to go to church. We want to see our community impacted. And part of that language is that they talk about being willing. Well, we were willing to allow for some change. We were willing to try some new things.
That's so important though, right? Because many people don't want to change.
Yeah, just move the pews and find out what happens. So I was talking with a pastor the other day, and I said, we have chairs in our church. He said, man, I so envy you because during all this COVID thing, moving pews was hard, but we were able to stack the chairs up. But yeah, there has to come this somebody in that older community. Let's just say it that way, in that older community that has. And let's face it, they've paid the bills. They've kept it going. They've taught Sunday school. They've cooked 1,000 casserole dishes for potlucks. Yeah. They've done all that. And they don't want to see it die. They really don't. But yet one of the challenges in rural communities is a constant turnover of pastors, of lead pastors. The typical rural church has a turnover of pastors about every 18 months.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. I'm somewhere down the 34th or 36th pastor here at our church since 1938. And so that averages out to about every couple of years. Now, there were those who were here longer, but what happens is every pastor comes in with this new vision. Hey, we're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to see God move this way. And they honestly come with that vision. I have no doubt that that's the case. But the people sitting in the pews are saying, we've heard that before.
Right.
And 18 months from now, you and your vision are going to move on and we're going to be here. And so what I try to challenge pastors on one side to say, hey, if you go to a rural community, go to stay. Right now, the Lord may move you on. The Lord may, I get that. I understand that. But don't see the rural church as a stepping stone to get to the urban or the suburban church where there's larger, opportunities or whatever. But there becomes this common language of vision, willingness, friendly. Everybody thinks their church is friendly until somebody new shows up that they don't know. Yeah. And then it's like, well, who's that? And who do they belong to? Because rural churches are very relational, complex. I pastored in a city of 9 million people before I came to a city of 5,000. Wow. I pastored in Johannesburg, South Africa for 12 years and planted 4 churches there. Saw God do amazing things. But then I come to a town that's pretty much, I was born in a small town, to quote John Cougar Mellencamp, right? I was born in a small town, raised in a small town. And, so for me, it was coming back to my roots, but in an urban area, your dry cleaner's your dry cleaner and your banker's your banker. Yeah. And you may not see them in between any of those kind of tasks that you need to accomplish. But here in a small town, my banker's also my deacon, who's also the softball coach, for the high school. So there's this complexity of relationships that takes place in these communities that is amazing. And if you get in and you work and you steward that well, it can really help you. If you don't steward it well, it can be a challenge. But yeah, it just, that willingness to say, you know what, we're going to begin to look outside of our own self. We're going to begin to see the harvest that God has put out there. And we're going to begin to think in terms of legacy instead of in terms of, can we just get the bills paid this month?
That's so important. And I think that as you look at the world, I just read an article. I believe it's on one of the Christian news websites that said an enormous amount of people in the USA are unhappier now than they've ever been. Mm-hmm. Of course, you take the COVID, you take protests. It's scary, and it's hard to be happy when you're scared of what you see going on. Right. But I do think that there's a lot to be said for people not having roots, and it's bump around from town. I've lived in 4 or 5 different states, and I've bumped around a good bit based on my husband's job, but I think that digging in deep with some roots wherever you are at whatever church is very important. And so let's talk about a lay leader and the power of purpose. purpose. And say someone lives in a town and they do want to get involved in a church. What do you look for to help people find their purpose within a congregation?
Yeah, for us, it's always been for the church that I pastor. That's been a major turn for us. Like, hey, so we've done that corporately by making one simple decision that we would no longer tell our community what we thought it needed, but that we would begin to ask the people who know what it needs, what they need. And so I began to build relationships with city officials, other pastors, school administration. Worked 2 years as a substitute so that I could get to know the school system. I'm a missionary at heart, so I just took that as a missionary, and I just began to do my missionary work, in understanding the community. And what we found we're looking for people who understand their purpose. Hey, you know what? God's got a call in my life. God's got something for me to do. And then my job as a pastor, Ephesians 4 tells me my job is to equip them toward that. Mm-hmm. Right. And so we've tried our best to do that. And so what I'm saying is, instead of saying, here's ministry, now fit into it, we've done our best and not always been perfect at it, but to say, hey, what has God put on your heart? Or, hey, here's an opportunity. So for instance, we found an opportunity in our town that people didn't have washers and dryers at their home, and they were coming to a laundromat. So once a month we go down, we spend a few hours down there. We take care of everybody's laundry. We help them fold. We pay for it. We provide the soap and the dryer sheets, and we help them in and out of the car. We discovered by asking that a large number of our high school students did not have access to hot water at home. Oh. So we helped provide the tools necessary to start a shower program at our school so that they would have towels, hygiene products, all that. We supply our school, high school, with all kinds of men's and women's toiletry items and so on. And that, so when we ask, what do you need? Then people tell us, and trust me, I speak to every pastor and lay leader out there. If you'll just go ask your superintendent, how can we help? They'll have a list. All right. And then do it and get involved.
Superintendent, you mean the school superintendent?
Yeah, school superintendent. Yeah. Fortunately, we're just across the street from the superintendent's office, so I can literally walk over there and say, hey, what do you need? But you also, as a lay leader, you need to develop that growth mindset in your daily walk, that, hey, you know what? Yeah, we're a small church, but that's not a penalty. That's a blessing, man. We can be nimble. We can react to things quicker because we're small. We don't got to turn around this giant ship. We're more like a John boat. We can kind of turn on a dime and take care of ministry as it arises. Mm-hmm. So keeping that growth mindset and then ultimately having that servant's heart that says, you know what? This isn't about me. This is about, or it's not even about my church per se. It's about the community that I live in, mm-hmm. that I want to make an impact for Christ right here, right in this place. And then pastors need to lead toward that, developing trust, developing ways for their people to really get to know them, developing those relationships. What we found as we worked with pastors who effectively turned their churches around, we found that they helped lay leaders feel empowered to minister. So they created an atmosphere where people felt like, hey, I can do something. I can be a part of something. They coached them. They coached them into good success. That doesn't mean they just let them do anything. They challenged them to do it with excellence. They challenged them to do it in a way that would let
me ask you about that, because I find that to be not common. So if someone says, I would like to start a ministry in my church, and I feel called to go out and do this or do that, an art ministry or a reading ministry, it's not usually embraced if there's not some logistical answer in place for that. I mean, it's very seldom that you have a pastor just tell someone, go, if God has called you to do that, he's equipped you to do that, and give them a little bit of leverage. I find a lot of people are frustrated with trying to find their place in a church, and that might not be a small church, but
well, it can happen, and it does happen a lot in small churches, because you have this family dynamic where sometimes it's some power families that kind of take care of everything, supposedly.
Yeah.
Or one of the problems that you face in a small church is a pastor who is convinced that he or she is responsible for everything.
Right.
Now, we are, in the sense that we have been given oversight of the flock, but we are not responsible to do everything.
Right.
Right. And so, so for me, pre-COVID, we have a couple folks who work on our prayer ministry team. So if I'm because I'm a bivocational pastor, I teach college and I pastor. And if I can't get to the hospital, I've got a team that goes out and does that, so what I'm saying is there has to be both sides. There has to be a people in the pew who say, you know what, I believe God has called me to be this or do this, or here's something I'm learning, and that honestly I haven't always done well at, but I'm learning, is that I don't really need permission to do something good. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I tell our church all the time, you know what, you don't have to ask me if you can go pray for somebody. I mean, just go pray for them, show up at their,
or go take a meal, or
yeah. And if God's putting a passion for something in your heart, and this is me, but I just feel like my role then is to just kind of coach you up. What do you need to do that? And what are the tools you need? Now obviously not everything that everybody's going to do is going to be done in the name of the church, right? It doesn't have to be. Matter of fact, in small towns, it's probably better that it's not always in the name of the church.
Yeah.
But yeah, that equipping and release, equip, release. But some of the fear that falls in there, especially in small town ministry, is, what if they go on somewhere else, and then that hurts us numerically, maybe financially, or so on. And so I get that. I understand that. And some people are reacting out of fear, but I can't
to lose someone over something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You say don't count the numbers, but you really do have to look at, the numbers.
Yeah, you do. And, all of us have certain inadequacies in our own lives, certain insecurities, I should say. And as pastors, that's, sometimes our security is in how large our church is or how small it is. And those are things we just got to deal with as pastors. And I can honestly say over the last 7 to 10 years, that's really been the Lord's sanctifying work in my life to be a little, has been to release people and to realize that I don't have to be everything. Right. That my role is to, in my mind, my role as a pastor in a small church is to cast vision, equip people, and then let them loose.
Yeah.
And,
well, so we're going to have to wrap this up because we're going so in a church or not in a church. So right now our nation is in a crisis and everybody is wondering, what do I do? Where is my purpose in this? And people don't know what to do. And most people, especially believers, want to do something positive, productive, purpose related. How do you decide what to do when you don't know what to do?
Well, Proverbs tells us, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding, but in all of your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your paths. Yeah. And when you don't know what to do, this is what you do. You get as close to Jesus as you can.
Amen.
All right. So you lean into prayer. One of the things that you find in a church that turns around is prayer becomes a number one priority in that. And they gather to pray and they pray specifically. Secondly, you realize that, you know what, unless the Lord builds the house, they that labor in vain. So allow God to speak to you. Let him search your heart. Let him search your heart. David said, search me, O God, and know me. Try me. See if there be any wicked thing in me. Search my heart, Lord. Are there things in here that are causing me not to do ministry because I have developed an unseen barrier toward another kind of people or whatever? Mm-hmm. And so lean into that, and then let the Holy Spirit, guide you. And then again, you don't need permission to do good. All right. Yeah. And I think the biggest thing is let the Spirit of God be your guide, and not the fear of the world, and not the dictates of man. Right. And I think if we'll do that, it's God's delight to hide a thing, but he doesn't keep it hidden. Right.
Exactly.
And here's what I know, the Lord, I'm just trying to, the Lord will speak to us through his word. He'll speak to us through circumstances. He'll speak to us in all kinds of ways. And from there, it comes down to us to be obedient to that word and move forward. And
go do it. As the old phrase, sometimes you have to do it afraid, but go do it. So right. You have your book, and you have a lot of your wisdom in your book. So what is the best place for people to be able to order that?
Okay. The book is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's called Rural Church Turnaround. Or you can go to my website, ruralturnaround.com. Okay. And there'll be a link there that actually will take you to the Amazon site. But so Amazon, Barnes & Noble should be coming out in bookstores here in the next few weeks. But who goes to a bookstore anymore? But especially with COVID and all that, so. But yeah, just go to Amazon, search Rural Church Turnaround, and yeah.
Well, we'll definitely, because we didn't get to talk about a lot of the things that I think that I would love to hear you talk about. So we'll have to loop back around.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Today, but this is really good because basically what you've said is you're asking your community. You're asking what people, how you can equip people, and then you're asking God. So you're all about gathering the information you need that helps you help people find a place to serve. And I think that's and listening to the Lord. So that's always really good. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I love the small town idea. I don't love the not internet very good idea, but that's getting fixed, so that's okay.
We're working on it.
Thank you so much for joining us. I hope your book does really well, and we'll keep in touch, and we'll come back and talk about some of these leadership strategies and things that you have, because I think those are really good too. So
love to.
We'll definitely do it. So thank you, Danny. It's been great talking to you.
All right. You too. Thank you so much, Miss Beth. I appreciate it.
All right. We'll talk soon.
All right.